Hello mga kababayan, welcome to my channel. Welcome to Laruan ni OB1. So recently, I just reviewed itong figure na to. This is the Mark III from the Infinity Saga by Marvel Legends, of course. Ito naman is from the first Iron Man movie, the first MCU or Marvel Cinematic Universe movie. So first merchandise, Mark I. So, but these two figures belong from the first Iron Man movie. So, ang kulang na lang is the Mark II. So, presenting the Mark II. For those who are interested in looking at the packaging for the Mark II, 11 years ago, this was the packaging for that toy. So, first MCU movie, the one that started it all. So, this is the merchandise that is related to it. And of course, we're going to have the figure. We have marketing material for the figure. And since we don't have repulsor blast effects back then, which you could attach to the wrist of the figure, this is how the repulsor blasts are for the figures of this caliber. So we have two forearm mounted cannons for repulsor blast, and these are the repulsor blasts. So you just stick it to the firing component and fire away. So you just stick these two to the forearms for repulsor blast. But figures right now would have that option of really having spare hands in packaging, and you have that attachment point on the palm of the figure. But for 11 years ago, that was the effect that you have. You'd be surprised at how much I was able to purchase this action figure, because this is $25. So for $25 for an 11-year-old action figure, you could possibly get one of this. So the Infinity Saga Mark III action figure is available at your Target for the same price, and when you consider taxes, then it's actually they are at par with each other, around the $27 mark. So why did I purchase this figure from my local specialty comic book shop or toy shop? I was just too tired of hunting for figures that are new release, and sometimes when you go to stores and they are not available, it's just a waste of time. And sometimes I just get tired of hunting for new releases or new action figures. So why go with the Joneses when you know that there are cool toys out there even though they are of old release? So presenting the Mark II. So we have the three armors from the first MCU movie, Iron Man. So we have the Mark I, the Mark II, and the Mark III. Of course, these two figures are from the first merchandise release 11 years ago, and this is a newly released action figure. So with regards to scaling and articulation, of course, this guy is going to win because of the new design and technology. But when you take a look at these two action figures from 11 years ago and factor this figure out, actually they are still okay. With regards to detail and panel lines, they are still a really detailed figure or figures. Mark I, even if this figure really suffers in the articulation department, just take a look at the amount of detail that is on the figure, even from the backside. So as from the back side, just like the Mark 1 from the Iron Man movie, we have all the components that you could see on the Mark 1. Also with the Mark 2. The Mark 2 has a lot of, actually the panel lines on these figures are deeper than the newly released ones, because as you could see, the panel lines on this new figure are just way too shallow. So especially on the back, you know that there are flaps on this armor. These are more pronounced on an 11-year-old toy. You know that these are the flaps for the armor when in flight. So still a good looking figure even if it's 11-year-old. But with regards to articulation, this is where these two figures would suffer, especially with the Mark II, because the Mark II, as you could see, the design is just way too thin or lanky, if I am grammatically right with my English. So you could it's just hard to imagine that Tony Stark would be enveloped by this armor, because it's just way too thin from the front of the figure, and even from the side profile. It's just hard to imagine that Tony Stark would be enveloped by this armor. But when you go to something like this, the newly released one, well, you could really note that Tony Stark would be in this armor. But of course, the toy technology is really different back then. Well, so when we had this figure, we really had that wow effect because of the details that were in it. But problem areas that we have back then, when you take this figure out of packaging, the joints are really problematic. It's because they are really stiff or stuck, and the most problematic part would be the hands of the figure, because the pegs are really small or thin. So if you don't take care of really hitting the figure out of packaging, subjecting it either to the boiling process or through a hair dryer, then you would possibly snap the hands off your figure. So since this is an 11-old figure, what I did was to really boil this figure in hot water. Let's discuss articulation points for this 11-year-old Mark II. So the head is on a ball joint, and it's literally a ball, because when you play with this figure, sometimes you have the tendency to pop it off, the head sculpt I mean. So that's the ball, and we have a really big hole on the head sculpt, which when you possibly snap this off the joint, you could easily pop it back in. Now moving on, I mean with the shoulder area. So these two shoulder guards are the most problematic parts. Actually, you easily could lose these two shoulder guards because they are just held there by friction. So when you move the shoulders around, you could possibly pop it off that way. So we have rotation and sideways movement. We have a cut on the bicep. We have 2 points of articulation for the elbow. This is an open palm for repulsor blasting. We have a hinge for the hands, but be careful, that is just a really thin hinge. and the peg is also thin, so you have the tendency to really, this is the weakest part on these figures. We don't have any cut for rotation on the waist, but the diaphragm area is the articulation point for the body. So that is on a ball, and you could move it around or sideways. As for the legs, that is a ball for movement, and this is the most annoying connection point or articulation point in this figure, is this ball for the leg area, because that is a ball and we have a hinge, and actually you could rotate the thighs and then pose it on different ways, but sometimes that ball gets in the way of articulation. We also have 2 points of articulation for the knee, so that's a 2-hinge system. We only have a hinge for the foot, so that's the articulation point for these two, for this Mark II figure. So as you could see, this ball joint or ball something for pose for articulation of this figure for the leg area is really the most problematic part or the most annoying part for this action figure, because you have to really play with that ball, and when, as you could notice, it's already on a different hinge area. This is supposed to be this way, the front part, but right now the back part is front and the front part is on the back. So I have to once again rearrange this ball point on the hips of the figure so they would be the same. Anyway, so that is the articulation points for this Mark II action figure. So we have a mix of the old and the new, old action figures, new action figures, one Iron Man movie. So once again, this is your humble reviewer, Laruan ni Obi-Wan. See you on the next video.